Hey guys, As-salaam alaikum. I'm back with my second video, so we'll see how it goes from here. So over the course of a week in between my first video and the video that you're watching now, I've been doing a lot of research with regard to other YouTube channels, looking at the sorts of cameras other YouTubers use, what sort of video edits they have, even looking at sort of topics that they cover within their videos. And one thing that I immediately noticed was the poor quality that my first video had in comparison to, hopefully, the quality of this video. And so I asked one of my best friends, what can I do to resolve this without investing in like a $500 camera? I'm an undergraduate student and I tend to be surviving off of like rice and beans at the moment, so buying a camera like that is a little out of the question at the moment. And she was saying one of the things that you can do to improve the quality of your videos is the lighting. So as you can see, I'm in a different environment other than my room, and hopefully this helps with the quality a little bit. I realized in my first video I probably look like a giant blur, just like shouting at you from across the screen. So let's hope that that effect is not reached within this video. So one of the things I wanted to address in this particular video is struggle. I've been looking at like a lot of other YouTube channels, in particular converts to Islam, and looking at the sorts of videos that they produce and the sorts of topics that they talk about with regard to the YouTube audiences that follow them. And I realized one of the popular topics was struggle. You know, of course, as a convert, there are many struggles and it's a long and sometimes painful journey. And I realized that struggle is important to talk about, but something with that is how to cope with that struggle. And I was trying to think of a different way to approach this. And so I was perusing my library collection and I found a few books that have helped me with my struggle in my journey to Islam. And I thought perhaps they could help you all as well. So I thought I would give you all a brief review and see what you think. So before making this video, I was really thinking, what are some of the main things that I've struggled with that other people may relate to as well? And I came up with a short list of 4 things that may be pertinent or more prioritized with regard to struggle. And this can go for converts to Islam, born Muslims, even anybody. And so the list is the following, and there's no particular order. One of them was invalidation. The next is vulnerability of struggle. The third is jealousy. And the last one is just the reality of life and learning how to move forward with struggle. Because no matter what you do, struggle will always be prevalent. It will always be there in some form or another, and sometimes it'll be incredibly overwhelming. But if we learn how to cope with this, we can move forward and become stronger. So the first struggle that I talked about was invalidation. And I know this is something that, you know, Muslim or not, anybody deals with being invalidated, and people will find any sort of excuse to invalidate you as a person, the things that you like, the things that you don't like. You know, the list continues on. And this is something that I personally struggle with, is people invalidating me as a Muslim. I have Muslims doing it, non-Muslims doing it, and it's particularly hard because it makes you feel a little less human. It makes you feel that you aren't worthy of being Muslim, that you aren't worthy of being valid. And this is quite a struggle, and it's an everyday struggle for me personally. However, despite that, one of the books that really has helped me with, you know, this concept of, you know, being invalidated is Lucy Grayle's autobiography of a face. I recently read this in one of my classes this semester where we focus on writers on writing and we look at different types of writing. And though this is a nonfiction novel, it really allows for one to appreciate struggle in a form that they may have not have been exposed to before. And Lucy describes her struggle in such a beautiful, elegant way that allows for one to, you know, place into perspective his or her own struggles and realize that no matter what, like, you know, you are valid despite what anybody might say for whatever reason they might have. A little bit about Lucy before I begin. Lucy was diagnosed with a really rare form of cancer at a very young age, and it was actually found within her jawbone. So I believe she was perhaps the age of 10, maybe a little bit younger, maybe a little bit older, but she had quite a massive reconstructive facial surgery to remove 1/3 of her jaw. So she had, you know, very intense facial scarring and, you know, many facial surgeries preceding that surgery in order to reconstruct her jawbone. And through her book, she describes some of the struggles that she's undergone with her appearance, how other people have viewed her, and how she has grown from this. But with regard to struggle in general, there's a specific piece of the book that really resonated with me with regard to being invalidated. Lucy writes, "I didn't yet have the clarity of imagination to grant myself the complicated and necessary right to suffer. I treated despair in terms of hierarchy. If there was a more important pain in the world, it meant my own was negated." A lot of people tend to indulge in this game of what I like to call the suffering Olympics. They tend to take their pain and place it over yours, and it's an unfair way of prioritizing themselves first. It's almost like a form of selfishness, and this is something that I've faced. I have many people invalidating the sorts of experiences that I go through as a convert and saying that perhaps, I could have it so much worse. At least I have a place to stay. At least, I have a job. At least I'm able to go to school. At least. And when someone does this, when they say at least, or they could, quickly brush off, your struggle and invalidate you by saying, oh, well, I experienced this, that, and the third, it makes you feel invalid, and it makes you feel like your struggle doesn't matter, and that's completely not true. So one specific form of invalidation that I have experienced is with regard to my being a white convert. I tend to feel a little out of place, sometimes in the masjid, sometimes during other events with regard to the Muslim community, be it at the MSA, at my university, or perhaps a community dinner at the masjid. I tend to feel a little bit invalidated as a Muslim because I didn't come from, a lot of the same cultures as born Muslims. I wasn't raised in the way that a lot of born Muslims were, and I didn't convert in some of the same ways that other converts have converted, and sometimes I tend to feel a little bit invalidated. And this isn't something someone's telling me, this isn't something that, is being forced within my perspective. It's something that I'm doing to myself. It's my doubt within myself, but it's still a struggle that I experience of that being invalidated. It's similar to imposter syndrome, and I know this is something that I talked about briefly in my first video with my conversion to Islam. I tend to not feel as a part of the community. I tend to feel a barrier in between myself and the community, and it's been very frustrating in order to realize that I am valid. Looking more into Lucy's book and how she describes, her suffering and her journey and her learning to become, reacclimated within society and her being okay with herself has allowed for me to, grow and to move forward and to be okay with my being a convert, and that it's nothing to feel invalidated over, it's an irrational fear. But nonetheless, it's something that still happens, with many converts and sometimes even born Muslims, and it takes time to realize that you are valid and that you are accepted. So something else I wanted to talk about was the vulnerability of struggle, which was my second point on the list. And the book that I would like to talk about, to pair, the vulnerability of struggle with is actually a poetry book. It's specifically a chapbook by Kaveh Akbar, and it is called Portrait of the Alcoholic. In this, short collection of poetry, Akbar talks about his struggles with regard to being a recovering alcoholic. Akbar was born Muslim. He was born in Iran, and he also incorporates a lot of Islam within his poetry as well, which made this particularly relatable to me. But I've noticed that talking about struggle, especially being a convert, is quite difficult, especially when talking to born Muslims. A lot of Muslims assume that because you've become a convert, you've immediately set aside, some of your shortcomings, whatever you'd like to call them, some of your sins, and you've moved on. You're completely anew. But sometimes it's difficult to get past our past. It's a little bit difficult to let go of some of the things and thoughts we would encounter when we were non-Muslim. It's not like it immediately, stopped, that past is completely eradicated. It's still a part of us. Sometimes it's difficult to talk about hardship, especially if these hardships are particularly like haram. I'm often feeling very judged for talking about some of my pasts and some of the activities I would indulge in, but reading this work of poetry has really allowed for me to see that it's okay to be vulnerable, it's okay to struggle. And there's a particular poem in here. I'm not going to read all of it, just a short tidbit of it, and it's called An Apology. At the end of the poem, Akbar writes, "Will I ever even know when my work is done? I'm almost ready to show you the mess I've made." And I think with this, it's just describing like how used up a lot of converts feel, and even born Muslims. You know, this really can apply to anybody. I know I'm targeting this towards converts, but it can apply to anybody. You know, you feel like all of your sins have added up, and you feel like so worn down, and you feel that, you know, when you talk about a lot of what happened to you before you were Muslim, and even some things that happened to you when you were Muslim, it's a difficult transition, and it's very vulnerable to talk about this, you know, the fear of being judged, and sometimes you will be judged. You know, I have had a few friends, even convert friends, who have, you know, laid down quite a lot of judgment with me admitting to some of my shortcomings and my faults. And really, in the end, you have to remember that the only person who is able to judge is Allah, and that it's okay to be vulnerable, and it's okay to be open about this. It's how we become stronger, and it's how we learn to move on. And this book particularly helped me with that aspect. So the third point I wanted to make is jealousy. This is something that I really struggle with, whether you're a convert, non-convert, hijabi, you know, not hijabi, whatever. I see so many people, particularly, you know, in the realm of social media, and they just seem so far above. And I wonder, how did you ever get there? A lot of girls my age are married, having children, they've completed their degrees, they've bought a house, and I realized, like, oh my God, I'm nowhere near there. And their man is so strong, and they are so dedicated and so diligent, and I look at this and I am in awe, and I am drowning in jealousy sometimes. And this is not a very lovely thing to admit to the world, but it's very true, and I realize that a lot of other people struggle with it as well. And one book that I thought of when I thought of jealousy was Anne Lamott's Bird by Bird. It's actually targeted towards writers. A lot of beginning writers tend to look at this book and use it as inspiration and kind of like a nice loose guide into getting started with writing and then how to continue from there. But Anne talks a lot about jealousy and how this can be really consuming. And jealousy is sometimes I struggle with. I wonder, is there something wrong with me? Why am I not on the same level as these girls? But then I have to keep in mind that Allah has me on a different path, and I will get to where I need to be at the right time. And it's about being patient, but it's a lot easier said than done. And trusting in Allah will always help. Praying will always help. But I found that this book always helps too. And there's actually just a few sentences I wanted to read really quickly with regard to jealousy that I thought might be applicable. I was raised in a culture that promotes this competitiveness, this instability, this fantasy of needing hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, and then in the next breath shames you for any feelings of longing or envy or fear that it will always be someone else's turn. I was only doing what I was groomed to do. Anne continues to write and say, so I wrote about trying to pay closer attention to the world, about taking things less seriously, moving more slowly, stepping outside more often. And, you know, in the context of what Anne has just said, she's saying that, you know, particularly in American society, I was born and raised in Northeast Ohio, I'm still here. It's really difficult to not be jealous. And a lot of people say it's not okay to be jealous, to feel those feelings of being inadequate. And particularly describes how one should just take a moment to realize that you'll get there, to be more aware of the moment, and to remember that no matter what, it's going to be okay, you'll find your place. And this is something that I hear Allah telling me every single day, and you know, I think reading this book has, you know, helped reaffirm that, and I thought it was something that you guys could relate to. So my last point I wanted to make was that struggle is sometimes all around us, and it can be so in an overwhelming way. And a particular book, again, another poetry book, that has helped me with understanding the reality of struggle is Ocean Vuong's Night Sky with Exit Wounds. This book has been such a godsend. And there were a few poems in here that allow me to realize that, you know, change is not something that happens overnight. It's not something instant. It takes time, and it takes patience, self-love, and a good community to do so. So one of the particular poems that really resonated with me in that context is Someday I'll Love Ocean Vuong. This poem really tells us the reality of life in soft words. So one particular poem that allowed for me to really realize this is Ocean Vuong's Someday I'll Love Ocean Vuong, and I'm just going to read a few lines from it. Ocean Vuong writes, don't worry, just call it horizon, and you'll never reach it. Here's today. Jump. I promise it's not a lifeboat. Here's the man whose arms are wide enough to gather your leaving. And with this, I think Ocean Vuong is just allowing for his readers to know that, no matter what, you're never going to be perfect. Struggle is not going to be easy, but we learn how to cope and we learn how to embrace reality for what it is. And we can do this through Allah's help, through Allah giving us strength to continue forward and to be as we are. And I think that's really the beauty of struggle. So I know I've ranted to you guys a little bit. I really hope that these books help you guys, and I hope that you guys check them out. They're quick reads and they're easy to find. I purchased all of these books on Amazon and they're not too expensive as well. And I think my closing words are just to remember that struggle is necessary, but it's something that we can learn to endure, and we can learn to allow it to embolden our lives and to make us, us.